They laughed when you were silent, when your voice cracked, when your eyes held back floods of words they never cared to hear. They turned away. You stood right in front of them, broken, bleeding, barely breathing. And they looked past you like you were invisible. You begged without saying a word. But silence is easy to ignore when it comes from someone they think they'll always have. You gave them all of you. The soft parts, the loyal parts, the parts that believed their lies and stayed. Even when your gut screamed, even when every sign said run, you stayed. You loved them with a kind of madness, the kind that made you forget yourself. And they mistook that madness for weakness. They thought your silence meant they won, that you had no words left because you had no worth left. Pain is strange. It doesn't stay quiet forever. It either eats you alive or turns you into something else. They thought you'd never leave, that no matter what they did, you'd come crawling back, whispering apologies for things you didn't even do. They got used to your presence, took it for granted like it was air. And when you stopped showing up, when the phone stopped ringing, when the door never knocked again, something shifted. They waited. First, annoyed, then confused, then afraid. Because it finally hit them. You weren't coming back. And now their silence is louder than yours ever was. Now they scroll through memories like ghosts scroll through ruins. They want to speak, but there's nothing left to say. Because when you were there, they ignored you. And now that you're gone, they miss a version of you that doesn't exist anymore. Funny, isn't it? They only miss you when they realize they can't reach you anymore. You were always the one in the corner, the one who smiled when it hurt, the one who stayed silent, not because you had nothing to say, but because you knew no one would really listen. You could be surrounded by people, still feel like a ghost in the room. That's the kind of loneliness they never talk about. The kind where you're still breathing, still showing up, but no one sees you breaking. They looked at you like you were small, like your softness made you safe to ignore. They thought your kindness meant you'd never bite. That because you didn't scream, because you didn't fight back, because you chose peace, you were powerless. They never saw the weight you were carrying. They didn't care to. Struggle makes people uncomfortable. And you wore your pain too quietly for their taste. You didn't make it dramatic enough. You didn't beg loud enough. So they turned their backs and called it your fault. They only cared when you had something to offer. When you smiled. When you succeeded. When you made them feel better about their empty lives. But when you started to fade, and the fire in your eyes started dying, they didn't ask why. They just left. That's the truth, isn't it? Most people love the version of you that doesn't need anything. They only show up when the spotlight hits. But the nights you were crawling on the floor, the days when it took everything just to keep your hands from shaking, no one was there. No one saw you. Or worse, they saw you and looked away. And yet you stayed silent. You swallowed the pain, hid it behind tired eyes and fake laughs. You told yourself to keep going, even when your heart was screaming. You carried wounds so deep, even mirrors couldn't reflect them. But that silence, It wasn't weakness. Number, that silence was pressure. Building, waiting, shaping you into something they wouldn't recognize. Because you weren't just breaking, you were becoming. You didn't fall apart. You fell inward, into a place where the world couldn't touch you. To the kind of pain that doesn't ask for help, because it's learned that help never comes. To the kind of strength that doesn't roar, it waits. And that silence they ignored, that silence is the reason they'll never hear from you again. They thought your silence meant surrender. But silence is how storms gather. There was a day, maybe you remember it, when something inside you just snapped. Not in rage, not in tears, but in stillness. The kind of stillness that comes after you've run out of explanations, out of energy, out of excuses, for people who never deserved your presence in the first place. You stopped defending your heart. You stopped trying to convince them you were worth something. You stopped explaining why you cared so much, why you stayed so long, why you forgave again and again and again. You just let it go. And it didn't feel loud. It didn't feel brave. It felt like nothing. A silence so deep, even you weren't sure what to do with it. That's how power begins. Not with noise, not with war, but with letting go. You looked around and realized you were the only one holding the rope. You were the only one apologizing, the only one bleeding, the only one trying. What were you trying for? To be understood, to be loved, to be chosen. You gave everything, and still ended up with nothing but a hollow echo of your own efforts. So you stopped trying. You stopped checking your phone. You stopped replaying old conversations, wondering what you could have said differently. You stopped hoping they'd wake up one day and finally see you. You accepted the truth. They saw you all along. They just didn't care. That kind of truth, it cuts deeper than any lie. But it also sets you free. Because the moment you stop needing their validation, you start seeing your own reflection. Not the broken one they left behind. Not the version you twisted into knots just to be liked. No, the real one. The one made of scars and fire. The one that survived every silent night. The one that doesn't beg anymore. You started walking differently. Talking less, thinking more. You noticed how peaceful it felt when you didn't have to shrink yourself to be tolerated. You realized you'd been trying to prove your worth to people who didn't even know their own. And slowly, the anger faded, the sadness too. Not because they fixed it, they never will, but because you outgrew it. Like a snake shedding dead skin, you left behind the version of you that clung to people who weren't even holding on. You don't owe anyone a damn thing anymore. Not your time, not your explanations, not your softness. They had all of that, and they wasted it. Now they'll watch from a distance, confused. Why'd you change? They'll ask. As if they didn't push you to this. As if your silence wasn't their final warning. As if your coldness wasn't born from their fire. But you won't explain. Not now. Not ever. Because you've learned that silence is a full sentence. You've learned that peace isn't found in being understood. It's found in no longer needing to be. You're not proving anything anymore. You're just moving. And as you rise, quietly, powerfully, they'll start to notice. They'll feel your absence like a missing limb. They'll whisper your name in rooms they once shut you out of. They'll regret. They'll panic. They'll reach. But it'll be too late. Because the version of you they buried, the one who begged, who broke, who tried, that version gave birth to someone colder. And that version never looks back. There comes a point where something inside you just dies. Not your heart, not your hope, but the part of you that keeps trying to make people understand you. You wake up one day and realize you're done. Done explaining why you cared, why you stayed, why you forgave them when they didn't even ask to be forgiven, why you kept showing up to a place you were never welcomed in. You reach a point where silence becomes easier than defending yourself. Because how many times can you tell your story before it stops sounding real? How many times can you bleed in front of someone who doesn't even flinch? You were always the one to reach out, to check in, to fix what you didn't break. You thought love meant sacrifice, so you kept giving and giving and giving, until you looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back. And that's when it hit you. You weren't loving them. You were abandoning yourself. Every time you stayed silent to keep the peace. Every time you bit your tongue just to be accepted. Every time you let them treat you like you were disposable. You were slowly disappearing, and nobody noticed. Because people only notice when you stop noticing them. They only call it silence when it's no longer convenient for them. They only care when your absence messes with their comfort. But you see it now, don't you? All the times they left you on red. All the times they laughed a little too hard at your pain. All the moments they made you question your worth. It was never about you. It was about control. They knew you would always explain yourself. That you'd chase, apologize, overthink. They counted on your kindness, on your loyalty, on your fear of being alone. But not anymore. Because now, you're quiet for a different reason. Not because you're afraid, but because you're done. Done performing. Done justifying, done needing to be seen by people who never looked at you in the first place. There's power in letting go, power in deleting the message you never sent, power in walking away without a word, power in not giving them the closure they never gave you. That's when you start to feel something new. Stillness, clarity, freedom. You stop explaining. And suddenly, you start breathing. Because when you stop needing to be understood, you start understanding yourself. And it's strange, isn't it? How everything shifts the moment you stop trying to prove your worth. You start moving differently. You speak less, but your presence is louder. You smile, not to hide pain, but because you're no longer trying to carry everyone else's. People don't know what to do with someone they can't manipulate. They don't know how to respond to silence that isn't begging, but ending. They feel it. The distance, the coldness, the wall they helped build. And suddenly, they want answers. They want the version of you who cried, who apologized, who bent, who broke. But that version, they buried it. They pushed it so deep into the ground, thinking it would rot. But it didn't rot. It evolved. And what came out of that grave is something sharper, colder, calmer. You. They'll scroll through old messages, trying to find a crack in your silence. They'll say you changed, that you're cold, that you turned your back. But you didn't turn your back. You just stopped giving pieces of yourself to people who only ever showed up with a fork and an appetite. Now they miss you, but they don't miss you. They miss the version of you who kept explaining, who kept hoping, who kept breaking just to make others feel whole. They'll beg for that version again. They'll want the one they used to control. The one who couldn't sleep without fixing things. The one who'd rather suffer than be called selfish. But they don't understand. That version died the moment you stopped explaining yourself. And what was born in its place? Someone they'll never be able to touch again. They'll beg for the version of you they buried, not knowing it gave birth to someone colder. You were always there, always showing up, always answering, always available. Even when your world was falling apart, you made space for people who never made space for you. You were the lifeline, the shoulder, the safety net. They knew that no matter how far they pushed you, you'd still come back. They took your loyalty and called it weakness, took your consistency and turned it into expectation. You were too easy to reach, too predictable, too present. And that's why they never valued you. People don't appreciate what's always there. They only feel the weight of it when it's gone. You didn't disappear to be petty. You didn't vanish to hurt them. You didn't go ghost to punish anyone. You did it because you had to. Because being near them was killing you slowly. Because you couldn't keep being the answer to people who only came around when it served them. Because you realized your presence had become too cheap, too available. So you made the choice they never thought you would. You walked away. Quietly, without a speech, without a warning, no drama, just silence. And that silence, it echoed louder than any goodbye. They noticed it in the little things first. The unreturned messages, the empty phone calls, the absence of your name in their notifications. They kept checking, thinking it was a mistake. But you weren't coming back. Suddenly, the person they thought would always be there wasn't. And they didn't know what to do with that. Because now you're not just gone, you're untouchable. They can see you, maybe, through someone else's post. A glimpse, a flash, a moment of your new life. But they can't reach you, can't ask, can't explain, can't control. And that kills them. Because there's no closure in your absence, no argument to twist, no guilt to weaponize, just distance, unapologetic, permanent distance. You disappeared, and they started unraveling. Because when you were present, they felt powerful. But now, they feel powerless. Because your absence is reminding them of what they lost, of what they threw away, of what they'll never get back. And they start remembering you differently. Not as weak, not as desperate, but as real, rare, solid. A presence they can't replace, no matter how many people they surround themselves with. You became a ghost, not to haunt them, but to free yourself. And yet, you do haunt them. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with silence. They see your name and their chest tightens. They replay memories like old films they can't shut off. They hear your voice in rooms you've never stepped foot in again. You are everywhere and nowhere. And that's the thing about absence. It doesn't scream. It doesn't beg. It just lingers. They tell themselves they don't miss you. They tell others you just changed. But every night they scroll. Every moment they stare at a screen, hoping for your name to appear. Every second they wonder if you think about them. You don't, because your peace is louder than their chaos. Your growth is louder than their regret. And your silence, it's now the loudest thing in their mind. You were never the sheep. You were just surrounded by fences, trained to stay small, told that silence meant submission, that kindness meant weakness, that forgiveness meant you'd never bite. They tried to domesticate you, tried to tame something wild, tried to convince you that your hunger was a flaw, that your instincts made you dangerous. They wanted you soft, predictable, obedient. But what they didn't see was the storm behind your eyes. You weren't weak. You were watching. You were learning. You were calculating the exits while they laughed at your stillness. They thought your silence meant fear. But it wasn't fear. It was focus. They thought the pressure would crush you. But pressure doesn't destroy diamonds. It creates them. And every time they underestimated you, every time they belittled you, every time they told you who you were and what you couldn't be, they were sharpening the blade. You didn't get stronger overnight. You were forged in loneliness, in betrayal, in silence. You were bent, not broken. Cornered, not caged. Delayed, never denied. And now they don't know what to do with you. Because the sheep is gone. And what's left doesn't follow anyone. You move differently now. Quieter, sharper. You don't bark. You don't growl. You just watch. You walk into rooms with eyes that don't ask to be seen. You speak only when it matters. And when you do, the room shifts. Because they can feel it now. The presence, the power, the wolf behind the quiet. They remember the version of you they played with. The one who cried too easily. Who gave too quickly. Who stayed too long. But that version was a shell, a disguise, a cocoon. You were never that person. You were just waiting. And now that you've tasted what it means to move without chains, to breathe without needing approval, to exist without apology, you're never going back. Let them say what they want. Let them twist the story. Let them pretend they didn't see it coming. Because deep down, they did. They felt the shift. They heard the silence. They sensed the change. They ignored it. And now, they're face to face with what they thought they'd never have to deal with. The real you. The one who doesn't chase. The one who doesn't explain. The one who walks away and doesn't look over their shoulder. You didn't get lucky. You got better, smarter, colder, more precise. You became the thing they swore you'd never be. Free. And now they fear the silence they once mocked, because it grew teeth. There was a boy once, not a loud one, not the kind that demanded attention. He was quiet, soft-spoken, always knocking, always hoping. He'd go from door to door, holding his heart in his hands like a fragile gift. knocking gently, not to beg, just to be let in, just to be seen, to be chosen, to be welcomed. Some doors slammed shut the moment he got close. Others opened just enough to let the wind in, then closed again, like he was never even there. Some gave him a smile, a promise, maybe, but never a place to stay. And still, he knocked, because he believed there had to be one. One door, one person, one place that wouldn't make him wait in the cold. So he stayed kind, stayed patient, kept believing. Time wears on a soul. Knocking turns into bruises. Smiles turn into silence. And hope becomes heavy. One day he stood in front of yet another door, tired, drained, forgotten. He raised his hand, but stopped. And for the first time he looked around, not at the doors, but at the space behind him. The open land, the quiet path, the untouched place where no one else stood. And he asked himself something simple. Why do I keep knocking on places that never wanted me in the first place? So he turned, walked away, not in anger, not in defeat, but in peace. And in that empty space, he built his own door. No, more than that. He built his own home, with walls that didn't need to be earned, with a roof that didn't cave in under someone else's expectations. A place where he didn't have to shrink to fit. A place that held him, not a version of him. No knocking, no begging, just belonging. And slowly, the people who once ignored his hands on their doors started to notice. They came by, quietly at first, then more bold, knocking. Knocking on the very door he built from the ruins of their rejection, calling his name, pretending nothing happened, saying they missed him, that they didn't know, that they made a mistake. But he didn't answer. He stood behind the door, still, strong, silent. Because he remembered every slammed door, every fake welcome, every cold shoulder. And he realized they didn't want him. They wanted what they thought they could control. This new version of him, they couldn't touch it. He no longer needed their warmth. He had his own fire now. You were that boy, and now you're the one on the other side. They walk by, pretending not to care. But they slow down. They glance through the windows. They wonder what it feels like inside the life you built without them. They never thought you'd stop knocking. But you did. And now, you used to knock. Now they stare through windows, wishing they'd let you in. There once was a boy who only ever wanted to belong. Not to a crowd, not to the world. Just somewhere. With someone. Somewhere he didn't have to ask to be accepted. With someone who didn't make him earn the right to stay. So he knocked. Not loudly, not with demands. He knocked with hope. The quiet kind. The kind that waits. The kind that believes people will eventually open the door if you're just good enough, patient enough, loyal enough. And for a while, he was. He waited in the cold. Outside doors that never opened. Outside hearts that never softened. He kept knocking even when his hands bled from trying. He smiled through the silence. Told himself, maybe they're just not ready yet. But days turned into years, and the doors didn't open. Or worse, they opened for a second, let him taste warmth, then slammed shut again. And every time, it cut deeper. Not because of the rejection, but because of the hope. Hope is cruel that way. It doesn't stab you, it starves you. He watched as others were let in, others who didn't knock, who didn't wait, who didn't care. And it broke something in him. Not all at once, but slowly. Piece by piece, the boy started to question the worth of his own knock. He started to wonder if maybe it was his fault. Maybe he wasn't enough. Maybe he was too much. Maybe he didn't deserve a door to open. Until one day, he stopped. He looked down at his bruised hands. He looked up at all the closed doors. And he realized something that shattered every illusion he'd held on to. It was never about the knock. Some people just never intended to open. They liked the sound. They liked the control. They liked knowing you'd always be waiting just outside, desperate. So he turned. He didn't knock. He didn't beg. He didn't scream. He walked. Farther than he ever had. Beyond the houses, beyond the noise, into the silence, into the unknown. And there, in the quiet, he found space. Real space. Not to be invited in, but to build. So he did. He built a home with no doorbells, no tests, no games, just truth, just peace. Brick by brick, made from every disappointment. Wood carved from every not enough. A roof stitched together with every silent cry that no one heard. And when it was done, he lit a fire inside. Not for others, but for himself. That fire kept him warm in ways their doors never could. Time passed, and then it happened. The same people, the same houses, the same locked doors. Now they were the ones standing in the cold. Now they were knocking, tapping gently, asking to come in. Acting like nothing happened. Like they didn't leave him in the dark for years. He heard them. He didn't hate them. He just didn't need them anymore. Because something had changed. He didn't crave their approval. He didn't ache for their warmth. He had found something better than being chosen. He had chosen himself. So he stood inside, quiet, calm, and watched them through the glass. Now it was their turn to wait, their turn to wonder, their turn to feel the silence. You were that boy. You are that boy. And you don't knock anymore. You used to knock. Now they stare through windows, wishing they'd let you in. You don't flinch when their name comes up anymore. You don't check if they've watched your story. You don't write long messages in your head that'll never be sent. You don't care who they're with. You don't wonder what they think of you. Because you're gone. Not physically, but emotionally. And that's the part they never expected. They thought you'd be stuck. Thought you'd linger in the past. Thought they'd always live somewhere in the back of your mind. Like a ghost with a key to your peace. But ghosts only haunt where they're remembered. And you don't remember them like that anymore. You didn't get over them out of rage. You got over them with silence. Slowly. Quietly. Every day. A little more distance. A little less weight. Until the memory didn't sting. Until the wound didn't speak. You stopped needing closure because you became it. They thought they had time, thought you'd circle back eventually. They convinced themselves you were just figuring things out, that you'd realize what you lost and come crawling back. But you didn't lose anything. You escaped. They expected tears, expected guilt, expected one more round of your forgiveness. But you didn't play the game this time. You didn't slam the door. You didn't throw words like weapons. You just vanished. Not for revenge, not to make a point, but because you simply didn't care anymore. And that is what kills them. The fact that you let go, not in anger, but in freedom. That you're not bitter. You're not burning bridges. You're building something on the other side of them. You smile more now, not to cover pain, but because the pain finally let go. You laugh differently, not louder, but truer. You walk like you're not waiting for anyone to catch up. And they feel it. Oh, they feel it. The weight of your indifference, the sharp edge of your peace, the realization that they don't live in you anymore. They thought their absence would break you, but it built you. They thought their silence would crush you, but it shaped you. They thought leaving you behind would make you chase, but it made you lead. Now, they're the ones chasing ghosts, looking for pieces of you in people who aren't even close, trying to fill the space you left behind, a space that only existed because you allowed it. But you're done giving space to people who didn't know how to hold it. You're done watering dead things, done feeding hands that only ever took. You outgrew the story, or you were the one waiting. You stopped being the character they controlled. You rewrote the script. And in this new version, they don't have a role. You moved on, and that was the kill shot. Not a scream, not a goodbye. Just a quiet, complete detachment. They don't get a seat at your table now. They don't get access to your energy. They don't get updates on your healing. They're not part of the comeback. Because the truth is, they lost you the moment you stopped needing to be found. They regret it now. Of course they do. When the room gets quiet, when the nights get long, when their new distractions don't fill the silence like you did, that's when it hits them. Not all at once, but in waves. The sound of your voice they'll never hear again. The way you made broken things feel whole. The peace you brought that they mistook for weakness. They regret it, but it doesn't matter. Because you've already become unreachable. Not because you're hiding, not because you're angry. Because you've outgrown the version of yourself that needed them. You're not looking over your shoulder. You're not waiting for the apology. You're not holding your breath for the "I was wrong." Let them talk to the silence. It listens better than you ever should have. You don't owe them an explanation. You don't owe them a moment. You don't owe them you. They had access to your soul, and they wasted it. They thought you'd always be within reach. They were wrong. Now your presence is reserved, your energy protected. You don't burn for people who brought water to your fire. You don't beg to be remembered by the ones who forgot you too easily. You were broken once, but not anymore. Now you're made of steel, built from every time they turned away. From every time they made you feel like too much, or not enough. Now you wear your scars like armor. Now your silence isn't the sound of pain. It's the sound of power. They'll regret. They'll wonder. They'll scroll through old memories, hoping to find the entry point back into your life. But it's gone. The door they slammed shut doesn't exist anymore. The bridge they burned was never rebuilt. And the version of you that waited, that hoped, that needed, that version is dead. And the one you've become doesn't look back. If this spoke to the pain you never told anyone about, this space is yours now. Subscribe, like, and comment below what they'll never hear from you. Your silence, your story, your power. Because you don't need to prove anything anymore. You already became the proof